Hello, I'm Mara. I'm from the Bruce Trail Conservancy and I work there as an ecologist. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about trail etiquette or etiquette when you're going out and maybe observing birds, or maybe you're just hiking, whatever it is you're doing. And I hope that I can sort of explain the link between trail etiquette and wildlife conservation and bird conservation because they really go hand in hand. And so I hope that if you're interested in birds, you're probably interested in protecting them, and you'll be interested in knowing how you can do that when you're out in nature on the trails. And for those of you who were here last week, some of this is going to be review, so I'm going to go quick through some things, but again, I hope that I can sort of make that link between the birding and the etiquette. Before I get into the etiquette, I just wanted to quickly talk a little bit about the Bruce Trail Conservancy. A lot of people know the Bruce Trail Conservancy for the Bruce Trail, which is a wonderful hiking trail through Southern Ontario. But the Bruce Trail Conservancy is actually a lot more than that, and we do a lot of conservation work as well, because our mission is preserving a ribbon of wilderness for everyone to enjoy forever. And so working with this organization, it means you get to see things from both sort of the side of hiking and trail use, and also from the conservation side. And so we really strive to make sure that people can access nature and go out and see birds and other wildlife while doing it in a sustainable way that has a minimal impact on the birds and wildlife that you're trying to enjoy. And so just to sort of lay down some groundwork, trail etiquette basically just means the set of, say, rules you follow, or just sort of a code of behavior that makes sure that we're respecting everyone around us. And when I say respecting everyone, that means respecting everyone else that's on the trail, respecting the land and all the organisms that live around you when you're walking on the trail, and of course, respecting people that might own the land that you're walking on as well. Because a lot of people don't realize that some of the trails in our area, including the Bruce Trail, actually pass through private land as well. And so you're there sort of because of the generosity of different landowners in the area. And so trail etiquette serves a number of different purposes, and I think a lot of these are probably common sense for people, but it really comes down to making sure that you're using a trail in a way that makes sure it's a positive experience for everyone out there, and I don't just mean people. So making sure that we're minimizing our impact on sensitive plants and animals, keeping everyone safe, and also respecting the people that maintain these spaces, people that are doing important restoration work. When you follow the trail etiquette, you're sort of showing respect for the work that's been done there. So for example, the Bruce Trail is maintained by over 1,500 volunteers. They make sure they're in good shape. They make sure that maybe there's viewing platforms for you to see birds or waterfalls and that kind of thing. And so when you are sort of staying on the trail, you're sort of respecting the work that they do as well. Most of what I want to talk about today, though, is protecting sensitive plants and wildlife, because this is Birding 101. And so for most of the talk, I want to sort of link trail etiquette and birding. Before I do that, I just wanted to share a few basics. Again, a lot of these are common sense, but these are sort of basic trail etiquette rules that I think you'll find should be followed kind of no matter where you are. Things like staying on the trail and obeying any signs that might be there. Things like packing out your trash, leaving nature as you found it. That means leaving rocks and sticks and flowers, leaving them in place for everyone to enjoy. But one thing that I wanted to highlight, and I think this is especially important over the last year and a bit, where we have lots of people maybe going out to natural spaces for the first time as they try to sort of escape the confines of their houses, is just planning ahead and preparing. And that just might mean maybe you visit the website of whatever place you're going to see and see if there's anything that you need to keep in mind before you get out there. So things like, do you need to make a reservation? Anything to keep in mind for parking? And do they have particular trail etiquette rules that they're asking you to follow? And so that's always a great idea before you get out there to make sure that you have a good experience. And I've just thrown down at the bottom, brucetrail.org is where you can find all of our information about our trails. And I know that there are similar web pages for other areas in the Hamilton Burlington area as well. So I want to highlight a few of the key trail etiquette points that I think are most important for protecting wildlife. And the first one is actually staying on the trail that's been created for your use. And I know sometimes it can be tempting to kind of wander off and see if there's something off trail that you can't see from the trail, or it's tempting to try to get a little closer to that waterfall to get the perfect photo. But I kind of want to point out that there's actually a lot of thought and work that goes into creating trails and deciding where they go. So for example, the Bruce Trail Conservancy will purchase properties so that we can protect it in perpetuity and so that we can place trail on the property. And so when we purchase a new property, the first thing we do before we lay down any trail, blaze any trails, is we take an inventory of what's there. So that means ecologists like myself will go out, will survey, are there rare or sensitive plants here? Are there birds nesting in certain areas? Is there an important wetland over here that we need to be mindful of? So that when we lay the trail, we're actually rooting it in a way that will sort of avoid impacts to the most sensitive species. And so when you're on a trail, you know that you're on a route that has been designed with nature in mind. It's been designed so that you can maybe view birds from a safe distance, or it's been designed so that you can see interesting plants without trampling them. And so by staying on the trail, you're making sure that your footprint is sort of contained and that you're not accidentally trampling on sensitive plants, for example. And this goes to my second point, which is that trails really concentrate disturbance in a small area. Because even when we're following all the rules, I'm sure everyone's had the experience of as you're walking closer, you maybe see a squirrel and all of a sudden it freezes. And so you know that it knows you're there. Sometimes you can even see its little heart beating and you know that it's getting a bit stressed, it's getting nervous as you get closer, and then maybe it scurries away. So every time we walk through an area, we're causing the animals a little bit of stress. They're spending a little bit of energy to maybe escape from us or to keep an eye on us. And that's energy that they need to survive and raise their babies and all that kind of thing. And so when we stay on a trail, we're basically concentrating our disturbance in one area and leaving the rest of the area as sort of a refuge for those animals. And so I think the photo on the right here kind of illustrates what happens when we start creating our own trails outside the main trail, is that it widens that area and area. And so there's more of an area of disturbance and less areas for animals to take refuge. And something that some people don't know is that a lot of birds actually nest very close to or right on the ground. And so by staying on the trail, we're making sure that we're not stepping on things that might be actually right beneath our feet. So for example, this photo on the left is a nest of some sort of thrush species. And this was directly on the ground, right beside a mossy rock, fairly close to a trail, close to the Bruce Trail further north. And so it just kind of illustrates that they're sensitive and there's really important things happening on either side of the trail. And we want to be able to observe those without interfering too much. The other important point that I think kind of is relevant for our talk today is leaving nature as you found it. And when I go out in a forest or a meadow, I think of it as I'm entering somebody else's home. There are animals that are raising their children there. This is somebody else's home. And so in somebody else's home, you have certain things that you do. You act like a good house guest. So that means cleaning up after yourself. And it also means you probably wouldn't steal things from your host's house. And what I mean by that is we want to leave everything where we found it. So it may not seem like a big deal to pick up a rock and take it home, or a stick or a log, but remember that there's lots of animals that live under those rocks and those logs and rely on that habitat for survival. So I've got a picture of an eastern newt here and many salamanders and things. They live under those rocks and logs. And so when you have multiple people visiting an area, one rock turns into 100 rocks and all of a sudden we're kind of affecting the habitat. And the last couple of points I have here are, again, just like any house guest, you avoid excessive noise and you respect personal space. And I think this is really important for birding because, again, during the spring, there's lots of birds nesting, we've got young around, and we want to just minimize the stress that we cause because it already takes a lot of energy to raise young and that kind of thing. And so we just want to be able to observe in a respectful way. And I think Jackson's kind of already mentioned this, but it actually improves your experience as well. And one thing that I know Jackson does with birding groups is he makes us all, because I've gone on many walks with Jackson, is he'll say, let's take a moment, we'll stop moving, we'll stop talking, and we'll stay very still. And you hear how the forest comes alive when you just quiet down for a minute. And so thinking about that as we're moving through the forest is maybe being a little more still, a little slower, a little quieter, and you'll actually probably see and hear more that way as well. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about pets because I love pets, but also because managing your pet is really important when you're with wildlife. Because I think Tom kind of touched on this, this is a really densely populated area. And so the little urban green spaces that we have are really, really important for the wildlife. They're sanctuaries, they're refuges from, all the pressures of urban development. And so when we're there, we want to make sure that it really is a sanctuary, a safe place for the birds. And if we have dogs running off leash and they're sort of going any which way, maybe they're chasing animals, then they're causing those animals and those birds to use up energy, avoiding them that they could be putting towards surviving and raising young. And especially in such an important area where we have such biodiversity of birds and wildlife, it really is a special place to enjoy. And so we want to make sure that we're giving those birds the space they need to survive. And so when it comes with dogs, it's keeping dogs on a leash where, unless you're in a no leash or an off leash zone, respecting areas where maybe dogs aren't allowed, because those areas probably are like that for a reason. Maybe there's rare birds that you don't know about that we're trying to protect in those areas, that kind of thing. And then of course, cleaning up after your pet. And sometimes I think people bag their dog's poop and then leave it on the trail thinking they're going to come back for it, but then perhaps forget, because this is something that we see along the trail a lot. And even if you think you're going to come back for it, you can imagine that the person behind you now sees that and goes, oh, okay, is this what everyone's doing? So it kind of sets a bad example. So those are kind of the things that you want to think about with your pets. And I think sometimes I hear from people, well, dogs are basically just like, domesticated coyotes, and coyotes are natural predators. So what's the big deal? Don't they fit into the environment? And I think the important thing to remember there is when we're in a really densely populated area, it's all about cumulative impact. So maybe one dog once a day isn't a big deal, but think about all of the people bringing their dogs into an area, and suddenly you've got many, many impacts. Natural canines would travel in small packs and have large territories. And when you're living in Hamilton, I'm sure you can see just how many dogs are concentrated in a small area. So by kind of keeping all of the dogs on the trail, we're making sure that wildlife has space as well. So that's kind of my spiel on etiquette. And like I said, you can go onto our website or websites of other places you're visiting and learn more if you have specific questions. Now that we know sort of how to act on the trail, I wanted to talk a little bit about where you can go to see birds. And I think Jackson's given us some great suggestions too. And one of the things you can think about, I'll give highlight locations in a minute, but if you're trying to decide where to go birding, I think it's important to just think about, well, what does a bird need to live? It needs shelter, food, water. Think about where maybe a specific bird might nest. Does it nest on the ground? Does it nest in holes, in dead trees? That kind of thing. And so when you start thinking like a bird, you can start to predict where you might see certain birds. For example, if you're trying to see small warblers and sparrows that might need to take shelter from predators, maybe you want to visit a place where there's lots of shrubs and sort of greenery that they can hide in, for example. So, and also if you want to see a diversity of birds, you want to go to a place where there's a diversity of habitats. So maybe you can go to a location where there's a bit of meadow, there's a bit of forest, you've got a pond, and so you're going to see a diversity of birds that way. And Jackson's already talked about this, but timing is also really important. Some birds only fly through here for a certain part of the year, so you can be thinking about time of year when you're deciding when to go birding. So as promised, I'm just going to highlight a couple spots within the Cootes to Escarpment Eco Park, which are particularly good spots for birding, and this one's already been mentioned. The Royal Botanical Gardens, the Arboretum on the North Shore, and Princess Point on the South Shore are really like the hot spot for birding in Hamilton. They have a diversity of habitats, like I already mentioned. It's going to attract diversity of birds, and you've got all of these amazing water birds in particular. And I particularly love going and seeing the bald eagles. In the wintertime, you'll see them out on the ice, which is really, really neat. And then you'll see all of these migrating birds as well that are stopping on their way south or north, depending on the time of year. The second spot I wanted to highlight is in sort of the Waterdown area. This is Kerncliffe Park and City View Park right next door. And this is a really interesting location because Kerncliffe Park actually used to be an old quarry. But now that it's retired, it's this mix of little ponds where stone has been quarried. You've got wetland, there's open meadows and forest as well. So again, you've got that diversity of habitats. And at City View Park, you also have excellent lookouts over the escarpment where you can see soaring birds like turkey vultures as well. So you get a lot of interesting wetland birds, the Virginia rail, red-winged blackbird, and you also get some interesting other wildlife. I've seen water snakes, a variety of turtles and frogs in the wetland area, so I definitely recommend checking that one out as well. And that is it from me. So I'm going to pass it back to Tom to moderate some questions, I believe.